Most people think protecting wealth during a market crash is a high-stakes game of timing, a frantic race to buy at the absolute bottom or sell at the peak before the floor falls out. But that's exactly the trap. That's the mindset that keeps retail investors broke, stressed, and constantly reacting, while a very small, quiet group of families consistently walks away with their capital intact, or even doubled, while the rest of the world burns. If you look closely at the long arc of history, there is a method refined not through spreadsheets, but through centuries of navigating total economic collapse, political upheaval, and systematic wealth confiscation. This isn't just finance. This is a survival framework that the Jewish people, in particular, had to master not out of a desire for luxury, but out of a brutal, recurring necessity for life itself. When you are a people who have been expelled from over 100 different jurisdictions, you don't have the luxury of trusting that the system will take care of you in your old age. You learn, through blood and displacement, that a bank account is often nothing more than a digital promise written on water. And promises are the first thing to break when an economy implodes or a government turns hostile. What you're about to hear isn't found in any modern financial textbook, and there's a cynical reason for that. The massive institutions selling you diversified mutual funds and retirement products profit specifically from you not knowing that this level of independence exists. They want you tethered to their platforms, their fees, and their rules. They want you to believe that diversification means owning 10 different paper assets that all rely on the same fragile banking infrastructure. But if you trace the flow of wealth through actual, bone-chilling catastrophes, the hyperinflation of Weimar Germany, where people traded diamonds for loaves of bread, the Russian Revolution, where fortunes evaporated into the cold air overnight, or the modern, agonizing collapses in places like Venezuela and Argentina, you start to see a distinct pattern. The families who survived and emerged as the new elite on the other side weren't lucky. They didn't have a crystal ball. They simply had a structure that assumed, from day one, that the system would eventually fail. They didn't hold promises. They held assets with intrinsic, undeniable utility. Modern finance loves the paper world, the world of derivatives, ETFs, and speculative growth. But ancient Jewish wisdom, forged in the fires of the diaspora, loves the tangible. We are talking about the law of thirds, found in the Talmud, specifically in the tractate Bava Metzia. It is a piece of advice that is thousands of years old, yet more relevant today than any tweet from a Wall Street analyst. It suggests a radical physical split. 1/3 in the ground you stand on, real estate or land. 1/3 in the business you run with your own hands, trade. And 1/3 kept liquid and portable. The third in hand. Think about the psychological weight of that. It's the realization that you cannot and should not put your life, your children's future, or your dignity in the hands of one king, one central bank, or one single currency. Real diversification isn't owning 50 different tech stocks that all move in the same direction when the market panics. It's having your wealth distributed across entirely different types of existence. There is a human dirtiness to this that we rarely talk about. It's the knot in your stomach at 3 a.m. when you see the news and realize the banks might not open tomorrow. I've spoken to people who had perfect portfolios on paper, millions in net worth, but when the crisis hit and the ATMs went dark, they couldn't buy a gallon of milk. They were rich, but they were helpless. They had wealth, but they had no power. The ancient strategy is designed specifically to prevent that helplessness. It's about having the ground beneath your feet, real estate or agricultural land that grows food or provides shelter regardless of what the stock market ticker says. It's about having a business or a craft that provides value directly to other humans. So you're never just a line on a corporate Excel sheet waiting to be deleted during a restructuring. And it's about having that final third, the liquid, portable wealth, whether in physical gold, diverse currencies, or commodities. That doesn't need a banker's permission or a functioning internet connection to have value. This brings us to a counterintuitive truth about debt that completely inverts everything you've been taught in your local bank branch. Most financial advisors tell you to fear debt during a crisis, to pay everything off and crawl into a hole. But history tells a darker, more sophisticated story. In a total currency collapse, fixed-rate debt can actually become a miraculous tool for wealth preservation. When the currency loses its value, the real weight of that debt evaporates. Imagine owing 1,000,000 units of a currency that suddenly becomes worth less than the paper it's printed on. You end up paying back your mortgage with the equivalent of a pocketful of loose change. This is a cold, calculated move that families have used for generations to flip a national disaster into a generational opportunity. But executing this requires a level of psychological steel that most people simply don't have. It requires you to be comfortable being wrong for a long time. It requires you to accept lower returns during the good times, the bull markets where everyone else is bragging about their 20% gains, so that you can be the only person in the room with liquid capital when the music stops and everyone else is forced to sell their life's work for pennies just to survive. It's often said that Jewish families don't just invest, they position. You're not trying to outsmart the market every day. You're positioning yourself so that you are never a victim of urgency. Poverty, in its most basic form, is the inability to wait. Poor people are forced to buy when prices are high because they need things now, and they are forced to sell when prices are low because they need cash now. Their life is a series of forced moves. By avoiding the chains of unnecessary debt and keeping that third in hand, you buy yourself the most expensive commodity in the world, time. You create a life of abundance where you can afford to be patient while everyone else is panicking. You are the one who provides liquidity when the world is thirsty for it, and that is where true fortunes are made. This is why you don't see this taught in conventional schools. Banks and consumer-driven economies cannot profit from a community that is self-reliant, debt-averse, and patient. They need you desperate, and they need you fast. Now, let's go deeper into the most vital asset in this entire framework, which isn't even financial: human capital. In the long, often tragic history of the Jewish people, a factory could be seized by a royal decree, a home could be confiscated by a mob, and a bank account could be erased by a new regime overnight. But a doctor, a master smith, a brilliant negotiator, or a scholar carries their wealth between their ears. This is why the culture has historically obsessed over education and professional skills with a ferocity that outsiders sometimes find confusing. It wasn't just about prestige, it was about risk management. It was about creating an asset that was border-proof. Your trade is the only wealth that is truly portable, invisible, and impossible to confiscate. If you have a skill that the world needs, whether it's medicine, high-level trade, or technical mastery, you can be dropped into a new country with nothing but the clothes on your back and be building wealth again within 6 months. When you combine that internal wealth with a global network of family and community, where a cousin in London or a contact in Singapore can provide a haven or a bridge when your own local jurisdiction turns hostile, you've built something that no single government, no matter how powerful, can ever truly destroy. This is about operational security and what I call the stealth of wealth. It's the person who drives a modest 10-year-old car and lives in a normal, unassuming house, but who owns rental properties in 3 different countries and holds physical assets in private vaults that don't appear on any government database. This discretion isn't about illegal activity. It's about recognizing that visibility is a vulnerability. In times of extreme crisis, the tall poppies are the first to be cut. Governments looking for revenue will always target the most visible signs of wealth first. The most resilient families in history were those who lived quietly and distributed their risks across multiple jurisdictions, multiple languages, and multiple asset classes. They structured everything during the calm, boring years, so that when the storm finally hit, they didn't have to do anything. The wealth was already moving, already protected, and already positioned. We also have to talk about the mechanics of crisis liquidity. Most people think having an emergency fund in a savings account is enough. It isn't. When the system freezes, that digital number is useless. The method taught in these circles involves tiered liquidity. You have cash in the bank for daily life, But you also have physical currency in different denominations outside the bank. You have precious metals, not just gold bars, but small silver coins that can be traded for actual goods. You have barter-ready assets. This sounds like prepping to the uninitiated, but to someone whose grandparents survived the 1920s hyperinflation, it's just common sense. It's the difference between being the person who can negotiate their way out of a crisis and the person who is begging for a government handout that might never come. Furthermore, let's examine the logic of the diaspora applied to geography. Modern investors are usually home-biased. They keep all their assets in the country where they live. They trust their local laws, their local banks, and their local currency. But history shows that no country is a safe haven forever. The Jewish method involves jurisdictional arbitrage. You live in one place, but your business might be registered in another, and your savings might be held in a third. You don't keep all your eggs in one geopolitical basket. This ensures that if your home country experiences a sudden shift in policy, a confiscatory tax, or a banking holiday, your entire life isn't paralyzed. You have elsewhere to turn to. This level of geographical diversification is something the average financial advisor will never suggest, because it's too complex. But complexity is the price you pay for true security. Ultimately, what we are talking about here isn't paranoia. It's high-level pattern recognition. History is not a straight line of progress. It's a long, messy, and often violent series of unprecedented disasters happening over and over again with different names. Conventional financial advice is built on the shaky, arrogant assumption of eternal systemic stability. It assumes the dollar will always be the reserve, the banks will always be liquid, and the laws will always be fair. The ancient method assumes the exact opposite. It assumes that systems will eventually break, that institutions will lie to save themselves, and that currencies will lose their purchasing power. It's a strategy built for the worst-case scenario that actually happens far more often than the experts on television want to admit. Think about the psychological resilience required for this. Most people cannot stand being different. They want to buy what their neighbors buy. They want to invest in what's hot. But the Jewish method requires a certain level of cultural outsiderness. You have to be okay with holding gold when everyone else is buying crypto. You have to be okay with keeping a large cash reserve when everyone else is fully invested in a bubble. You have to be okay with prioritizing safety over status. This is the method banks won't teach you, because banks want you to be a consumer of their products, not a master of your own destiny. They want your wealth to be a service they provide, not a fortress you build.
If you're tired of being a customer for the banking industry, a source of fees, interest, and data, and you want to start building the kind of resilience that survives for generations, you have to change the fundamental assumptions you've been living by. You have to realize that wealth isn't just a number on a smartphone screen that can be swiped away by a technical error or a political whim. It's the physical, tangible, and intellectual ability to protect your family, your time, and your future, when the promises of the modern world are being broken all around you.
It's about being the person who can sit at their table, look their family in the eye, and know that no matter what happens to the stock exchange, your future is already secured because it was built on a foundation of wisdom that has already outlived a dozen empires and will likely outlive the one we are in today.